The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. By Jonathan Haidt. Raising my own children, I often reflect on how best to nurture their confidence and self-esteem. With cell phones and tablets being so prevalent, I acknowledge that our family's routine includes a significant amount of supervised screen time. That's why I found the topic of this book particularly compelling. It resonates with concerns I frequently consider. For those seeking practical strategies to raise resilient and independent children, I encourage you to explore this book further. Introduction: Growing Up on Mars. Imagine if a billionaire announced a project to send children to Mars. The conditions are unfamiliar: lower gravity, higher radiation, and an environment untested for human development. Parents would naturally resist sending their children into such an experimental setting. But as Haidt argues, we have unwittingly done something similar by allowing a massive transformation in childhood to take place with no research, no safeguards, and no real understanding of the consequences. Over a very short span of time, from around 2010 to 2015, childhood underwent a radical shift from being play-based and real-world centered to being phone-based and virtually dominated. The smartphone and social media became the defining elements of adolescence. Before this, children grew up primarily interacting with peers, adults, and their environment. Now, they are immersed in an always-on, highly addictive digital universe. The consequences of this shift have been severe. Mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide have skyrocketed among teenagers. The problem is particularly acute for girls, who are disproportionately affected by the pressures of social media. Boys, on the other hand, have drifted into video game addiction, pornography, and social withdrawal, leading to lower motivation and an inability to transition into adulthood successfully. Haidt's argument is clear: this shift was not inevitable, nor is it irreversible. By understanding what went wrong, parents, educators, and policymakers can take steps to rebuild a healthier, more resilient childhood. Part 1: The Mental Health Crisis, a Tidal Wave of Suffering. The numbers are staggering. Since the early 2010s, there has been an explosive rise in mental health disorders among teenagers, particularly in countries where smartphones and social media use became widespread. Rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harm among teenage girls have doubled, and in some cases tripled. The biggest increases are seen among preteen and early teenage girls, ages 10 to 14, suggesting that exposure to digital pressures during puberty is particularly harmful. For boys, the trends are different but no less alarming. Instead of social media anxiety, boys are increasingly withdrawing into digital escapism, video games, online pornography, and YouTube rabbit holes. This results in low motivation, social detachment, and a failure to develop the emotional skills necessary for adulthood. Haidt emphasizes that this is not just a case of better mental health awareness or changing diagnostic criteria. The evidence of a true crisis is overwhelming. Our emergency room visits for self-harm among teenage girls have tripled since 2010. Suicide rates among teenagers have doubled in the past decade. The decline in mental health is consistent across multiple countries, particularly in those where smartphone and social media use became widespread at the same time. Haidt argues that this crisis is new, unique, and preventable. Unlike previous generations, who faced world wars, economic recessions, and environmental challenges without a comparable mental health collapse, today's teenagers are suffering despite living in relatively peaceful and prosperous times. The key difference? Their childhoods have been rewired. Part 2: What Childhood Used to Be Like, The Loss of Free Play. The Play-Based Childhood. For most of human history, childhood was active, social, and grounded in real-world experiences. Children played outside, engaged in rough-and-tumble games, and navigated friendships through direct face-to-face interactions. These activities built resilience, emotional regulation, and social competence. Psychologists have long recognized that unstructured play is essential for developing key life skills. When children are allowed to take risks, whether by climbing trees, exploring the neighborhood, or resolving playground conflicts, they learn independence, confidence, and problem-solving. However, in the late 1980s and 1990s, parental fears about safety began to reshape childhood. The media exaggerated fears of crime, kidnapping, and accidents, leading parents to limit outdoor play and insist on constant adult supervision. Schools reduced recess time, and structured extracurricular activities replaced free play. At the same time, screen-based entertainment began taking over. What started with television evolved into video games, computers, and eventually the smartphone, a device that fully captured children's attention. The decline of puberty as a social transition. Puberty is a critical period of emotional and social growth. Traditionally, it marked the shift from childhood dependence to increasing autonomy and peer bonding. Teenagers in past generations developed deep friendships through shared experiences, such as sports, after-school activities, and local community events. Today, many teens go through puberty entirely within a digital world, where social interactions are curated, performative, and anxiety-inducing. Instead of learning how to handle real-world relationships, they manage online personas, constantly seeking validation through likes, shares, and comments. For girls, this has been particularly harmful. Social media has amplified body image pressures, status comparisons, and public shaming. Boys, meanwhile, have found an escape route: immersive gaming, online pornography, and solitary digital consumption, which stunts their emotional development. The combination of overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the digital world has left kids more fragile, anxious, and unprepared for adulthood. Haidt identifies 4 key ways that excessive digital exposure is damaging children. 1. Social deprivation. Kids are spending less time in real-world interactions, leading to weaker friendships, social anxiety, and loneliness. 2. Sleep deprivation. Nighttime smartphone use has led to massive sleep deficits, worsening anxiety, depression, and cognitive performance. 3. Attention fragmentation. The constant notifications and dopamine-driven design of social media have made it nearly impossible for kids to focus deeply on tasks. 4. Digital addiction. Social media, video games, and online content are deliberately engineered to be addictive, leading to compulsive behaviors and withdrawal from real life. Why girls and boys suffer differently. Girls are more vulnerable to social anxiety and online comparison, making social media particularly damaging. Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat create a constant pressure to curate the perfect life, fueling low self-esteem, eating disorders, and depression. Boys, on the other hand, are less active on social media but more drawn to immersive gaming and online pornography. Many boys develop a reluctance to engage in real-world challenges, leading to social isolation and a failure to transition into adulthood. Both genders suffer from an erosion of real-world experiences, but in different ways. Restoring childhood. What parents can do. 1. Delay smartphone and social media use. Haidt recommends keeping children off social media until at least age 16 and giving them a basic flip phone instead of a smartphone before high school. 2. Create tech-free zones at home. Bedrooms, family dinners, and social gatherings should be screen-free. No phones should be allowed in bedrooms overnight. 3. Encourage outdoor play and real-world socialization. Parents should actively encourage independent play, physical activities, and face-to-face friendships. 4. Support phone-free schools. Schools should require students to lock up their phones during the school day, allowing them to focus on learning and real-world relationships. 5. Model healthy digital habits. Parents must lead by example, showing that real-world relationships matter more than screens. What schools and society can do. 1. Ban smartphones in schools. Schools should require students to store their phones in lockers or locked pouches throughout the school day. 2. Increase outdoor recess and playtime. Schools should prioritize unstructured play, giving children opportunities to develop social skills. 3. Regulate social media for minors. Governments should enforce stricter age limits and require parental approval for accounts under 16. Conclusion: bringing childhood back to earth. Haidt argues that this crisis is not inevitable. By delaying smartphone use, encouraging outdoor play, and setting clear digital boundaries, we can reclaim childhood and protect future generations from the mental health disaster of a phone-based life.